So we're going to start by doing our study of the torso. Let's go ahead and increase our subdivisions up to the max level here. So we are at the highest, and we're going to create a new layer per category. Now this layer here was kind of a base adjustment layer here. You can see this one was to just kind of tweak the proportions. I'm okay baking that down because it's a permanent change. But for each of these categories, we're going to create a new one here. So I'm just going to hit the plus button here, and we're going to use this to start defining our back. Now, the first muscle we want to get to is the trapezius muscle. The trapezius muscle is going to be the large muscle here around the backside. And this is a good place to begin. Kind of defines a lot of the space of the back and the scapula and a lot of just really good angles. So let's go ahead and begin with that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use the dam standard to define the border edge of the trapezius. So the dam standard you can access by B, D, and S to get that dam standard. Now this might be a little bit strong by default at 30 some odd. I usually like to lower it down to around 15 when I'm using it for anything organic. This way it's not as resource hungry. But I actually think we could bump this up to probably about 30 for what we're doing. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look for the relationship between the scapula and the trapezius. And the trapezius kind of comes along the clavicle area there, if you remember. So it actually cuts into quite the portion of this here. So I'm going to bring this down at a bit of an angle across the top of this. And it's going to look a little bit harsh, but that's going to be the top of where the scapula kind of runs. And this is going to go into the shoulder. And then it's going to turn down rather harshly down towards the center of the back. So we're going to just define that up a little bit better there to be our border edge of the trapezius muscle. Now we can go ahead and define the neighbor muscles here, such as the deltoid, and we can use the dam standard for that. We're going to do this on the back. We'll get to the front later. This line is for placing the shoulder blade muscle, just to kind of get a better read on where that's going to go. Now this is going to emerge from the corner here of the latissimus dorsi. So you can see my angle's not quite perfect here, and it's basically going to be a long swoop to the front of the deltoid head. So we're going to have a bit of an angle like so. And you'll see this is going to be more well-defined than our ram brush pass. You may also consider working at one level down in subdivision. So I'm hitting Control-Z here to undo because there's some muddiness there. Usually it's not best to work at your highest subdivision level ever. That's kind of for detailing. And since we're kind of doing a block and pass here, still, we don't want to get into that. So we're just going to run that down to the deltoid head. And we'll tackle the front and side of that later. We just want to get a read on the backside so we can define this better. We can then cut the muscle to separate the shoulder group. So this is going to be coming from the latissimus dorsi here. And it's going to kind of be wrapping and tucking under the arm here. In terms of this is going to be something like this here. Should be close. So separating out that shoulder group. And we can bring that up onto here. Then coming into the shoulder group, we can start by defining some of the indentations of the shoulder. So there's a triangular indentation in the shoulder here, which is located on the interior here. And this is actually something you see on the body. This is an indentation. So what I like to do is just kind of carve this in a little bit better. You can go ahead and just kind of come across here with your dam standard if you want to just kind of bring it down. And I'm just lightly going across there in a line. You could also use BCB to get to the clay buildup and just lightly hold down your sculpting tool and just kind of push that in. There are several triangular indentations on the body that manifest, and they always seem to be in a triangle form. So just kind of be aware of that. But that's going to be one of those. Mine might be a little bit big there, but should do. From here, our shoulder kind of divides into three groups based on those smaller muscles inside of there. And you'll remember that from the Écorché study. Now, they kind of radiate from this lower point, not exactly where this triangle indentation is. It's kind of just to the side of that. And we can basically just draw a line up And then right next to that, draw a line out. And that's going to give us the lines for the muscle groups there in the shoulders. So now that we have these blocked in, we can go ahead and bulk out some of the details here with the shoulders. The brush that I like to use for this is the clay buildup. It is a very useful one to kind of build up detail. And we can start to add form and detail to these areas. So let's go ahead and kick things off here. We're going to deal with the infraspinatus, the teres minor, the teres major, and the triangular depression. So I'm going to go to BCB for clay buildup. I'm going to lower my intensity to about 5 here. And I'm actually going to switch to RGB at this point. Now, you may need to check to make sure that the poly paint is turned on if it hasn't been yet, and it has not. So I'm going to click colorize. You might notice this went to black. What I'm going to do is something kind of weird. This is an additional setup thing here. I'm going to name this layer torso study. And I'm going to create a fresh layer here, and then just hit the up arrow to put this on top. So you can use this little hook area here to move it up, and just name this white pass. So we created this white pass layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to switch my brush to something I don't usually use, like the standard brush, just BST for standard. A very important step here is you turn Z-add off, so it's not sculpting, and you switch to RGB. And then from here, I'm just going to make my brush real big, and I'm going to paint this in white on this layer. Sometimes ZBrush is kind and doesn't give us a completely black layer. Not today. So the purpose of this white layer is to just have it on top so that we don't have the complete black character as our start point. And yeah, we can go ahead and resume our torso study after this. So I apologize if that's confusing to follow at all. You don't have to use color if you don't want to. I'm just trying to make it a little bit easier for you guys visually. So if I turn on this layer again to record and go ahead and type in BCB for clay buildup, this will give me the ability to access the color. So now I could go ahead and switch this to something like orange here, and I can start to lump in the infraspinatus and the indentation and all that good stuff. So the infraspinatus here is this here, this muscle, and the fibers of this are going to kind of run up and under the shoulder blade here. So what I'm going to do is kind of build these up, and you can see with the clay buildup, what's really cool is we can kind of indicate these muscle striations. These are going to come down towards here, and they're going to angle up towards that area. So that's going to be kind of how this muscle goes here, and that's going to be the infraspinatus. Now, I want to take some time shaping this, but before I do, I want to get an indication of the individual muscles in here. So that's going to be the infraspinatus. Then underneath that, we have the teres major. I'll go ahead and indicate this in red. And the teres major is going to run along here, and it's going to curve up into our shoulder here. So this is the teres major here. And while I'm doing this, I want to look for the volume here. So you can see I don't quite have the volume in this muscle. So what I'm going to do is just kind of repeatedly build this up with the brush to find that roundness. And remember, our muscles should have sort of almost a water balloon shape to them, where they have a nice fullness going into the form they're connecting to. So I'm just going to keep filling that up there so we can get a feel for how that is going. All right, so that's going to be the teres major. And then between those, we have the teres minor. And for that, I'll use sort of a lighter color. The teres minor is pretty small in here, and it's just going to have striations moving forward into that area. I'm just going to plug in between the two of these. All right. And then this is going to be the triangular depression. I'll go ahead and make that a bit darker and stick to our red theme here. I'm going to hold, so we'll just get that in there. Now, I want to spend some time shaping these. I'm going to sample this one by hitting C for color. That way I can access the color here and just kind of color this. And if you're satisfied with the color placement that you have, you can actually turn off your RGB to continue working on this. So let me just sculpt this one a little bit more. We can turn off RGB and we can start shaping these a bit better. Now, a brush I like to use is the H polish brush, which you can access by hitting BH to see the H polish, and it's P, BHP. The H polish allows us to kind of flatten things. So these muscles, they don't just kind of puff out, they kind of dive into each other. And you can see with the H polish here, what I can do is I can kind of push this to have a flatness to it. And I can really shape the muscle so it has the correct structure. Now, the structure these muscles should have is sort of almost a cone shape across each of them. So we should have this sort of roundness to them running down each one. And I feel like these ones here are okay. I'm still going to take some time shaping those with the H polish. But these ones here, the infraspinatus, it needs a bit of love. It needs to have this sort of separation where it dives down next to the neighboring muscle groups and connects into here. And also here tucks under. It's going to tuck under the deltoid. So I want to kind of emphasize that. Right now it's kind of just ballooning up next to, but I want it to look like it's tucking under there. So I'm going to use the H polish to kind of work this muscle here, the infraspinatus muscle, to give me something a little flatter and with better form, and then I'm going to build up on top of that. Now, if I do it to one, I'm going to do it to the neighbors. I'm going to use the damn standard here to redefine my separation here and use the H polish to get a nice look into here and just kind of work this in just like I did with this one. You might find at this point, since we're getting into detail, you might need to go to your highest. Apparently I am already on my highest, which is a little bit concerning. But this shoulder detail is some of the smaller muscle when we get into the torso. The only areas with smaller are going to be the arms and legs, really, and hams and feet. But it is surprising we're seeing this much of the polygon data. But that's okay. So I'm just going to get this to have relatively the shape I want, and then we're going to come back with the clay buildup and build it up. The main thing I want to make sure is I'm getting that tuck to look right going into these areas. I'll do the same thing here. This is a muscle we built up a lot, so I don't feel like it needs as much attention. The teres major down here. So I may not give this one quite as much time, but I can give it a little bit of time. I might use shift here to smooth out the area next to its neighbor so that we can define that more clearly with our brush detail and just get a nice form. Okay, and then as far as the triangular depression goes, H polish is great for just kind of flattening this out, making it a bit more even. And now we can go back over the top of this. So I'm going to go back with the damn standard again and just kind of recarve my forms. I'm going to lower the damn standard to about 15. I think moving forward, I'll use 15 because 30 is just too aggressive. With 15, you can kind of control these angles a little bit better here and just kind of give it a nice indentation that doesn't eat away at the detail. And then using the clay buildup here, I can work back in the volume and get the muscle striations in there for a point of reference. So we'll just kind of get those in there and just look at the volume of the muscle, make sure it's looking correct, and do the same thing here. So I'll clay build up in this direction, maintaining their nice overlap. And that one should actually sink into there, but we'll get that with the move. And then do the same thing here, just kind of bringing back in the fullness of this muscle so it doesn't look so geometric from the edits we made. And remember, I turned off coloring. You can also use Alt if you feel like any area is kind of getting a little bit too poofy. So it's just kind of back and forth between Alt and just doing your stroke. But do take time to get the muscles looking good, because they are going to change how your model looks at the end of the day with everything layered. Now, the teres minor here sits inside of these a little bit more, so I can actually use Control here to mask this area off, which is kind of cool. And I may need to take some time to make the mask a little bit better. But that doesn't stick out quite that far. So to invert the mask, all I did was control click out here, right? And then I'm just going to use BMV for the move to move this down. And you can see I can push that to be underneath the other ones a little bit more. And if I want to, I could actually come in here with the clay buildup and just kind of gently adjust this by itself. And some of these lines here from the dam standard are getting a little bit fuzzy. I'm just going to dam standard again, recarve those lines, and then just lightly clay buildup for the muscle detail on this area. Once more. And that should give us an okay look at that shoulder muscle group. All right, so that's going to give us the infraspinatus, teres major, teres minor, and the triangular depression on the shoulders there. And I'll just add in a little bit more color here, just so you can see that a little bit better, where that connects. And the triangular depression isn't quite as big as I made it, so I'm just going to give a little bit more meat to the infraspinatus here. Smooth out that area going into the triangular depression, and then just come into the triangular depression here and give that a little bit more love. All right. And the belly of this should be a little bit more down the middle. All right, cool. The first muscle has been laid down. So let's go ahead and save, because we've made a bit of progress here. And let's go ahead and work into the next section, which will be continuing to define the deltoid. So I'm going to switch back to the dam standard, BDS, and we're going to switch to the front here to define the deltoid from the front a bit better. We're going to want to look for where that relates to the clavicle. So it's going to be kind of the last half of that little S hook, and it looks like we have a pretty good placement for this. So we're just going to come down from here and bring it to the front. I might want to bring this back up to 30 just to be consistent with my dam standard. And this one's going to come down, and it kind of turns at a point here near the armpit. And goes into the front deltoid head, which is going to be here. And we are going to have this little crisscross sort of going on. Now, that's a very wobbly looking structure, so we're going to define that a bit better as we go. One of the things we want to do, coming to the backside, is we want to look at how this is coming onto the arm. The backside of the deltoid is more curved into the arm, while the front side runs at more of a narrow slope. And we have that going on here, where we have this narrow slope and we have this back curve. We do, however, want to observe how those relate to each other. They are pretty close here, so I think that's okay. We'll be able to kind of adjust that as we go. Now, after this, we can get into 3 heads of the deltoid. So remember, the deltoid has 3 heads. Looking at those, we're going to have one running from here, kind of up to the clavicle. And then we're going to have some on the back here. I think it runs to the top of the scapula, approximately. And they all kind of converge at this point here. So you end up with the 3 separations there at the deltoid. So from here, we can take a bit of time shaping this and getting it to look right and adding some bulk. So let's go and switch to BCB for clay buildup. On the back side here, let me turn off my RGB here. We're going to have sort of a mid-volume going down each head. That's going to be where the belly of this falls. So I'm going to want to have some nice bulk to this and just kind of get the volume going here. Notice I go in the direction of the muscle striation. I'm actually going to alt right here to reduce this though, so we get more of that tucking feel. So I'm just going to hold down alt and just kind of wear down the side and just get this to come out nicely here. And I'm looking down the center of this structure just to make sure I'm getting that volume to kind of be more towards the center of the mass than anywhere else. And we can bring this right up next to the other head of the deltoid. And I actually might alt here a little bit just to make that curve a little bit less, just to have a nice smooth transition into the surrounding deltoid. Okay, so we can move into the next head of the deltoid, which is going to kind of come up and into the clavicle region here and the back of the scapula. And once again, just kind of look at this for volume and form. It's going to have a bit of a roundness at the top to it here. So this one's going to be one of those ones that really defines the shoulder area. So I'm going to want to make sure that belly is kind of well seen on that midsection and that it carries down into the rest of the form. And it's also important to look at it from this area. Now, the deltoid from the side, it has sort of a squareness to it that we should be seeing. So when we see the deltoid, it kind of rolls down from the shoulder. It has a flat area and then it tucks under again. And the volume of ours is a little bit too strong. We're going to use our anatomy reference to match that up. But I'm going to start by just getting the volume in here for the belly. And then we can do the same for the front side. We can come off the clavicle here. And remember, it has sort of this turn in here. We're going to want to keep that because it's going to be the area the pectoralis tucks under. So you want to make sure you're keeping that sort of turn in the structure because that is something that we will see somewhat visually. I feel like the head there is actually a bit further down, though, than how I have it represented potentially. Let me think about that real quick. And this would be the stage to catch this at, if you're wondering. But I think for what we're doing, that's going to be about as good as it gets at the moment. I'm just trying to think of how these relate. So my angle is wrong here. It has a bit more of an angle to it. Now, if you need to erase a line, you can go to a lower subdivision and just smooth out that area. And then you have to go up an iteration in subdivision, and you have to continue the smoothing process. But you can see I can kind of erase this line I've created with the dam standard by going backwards and then going forward and just kind of smoothing each stage as I go. You do want to make sure you get to the higher stage, and this will have some rippling effects later that are going to be not as fun to deal with, but we can deal with that as we get there. But this is actually going to come at more of an angle here than what I currently have and then tuck in rather quickly. So I think that's going to be more accurate for what I am looking for, because this is going to be part of the pectoralis muscle here, kind of coming down. So we want to give it space for that. But that should give me a better read on the structure. And I'll just smooth out that line a little bit so it's a little bit closer to what I want and start building off of that. But we can use the clay buildup here to build this up, BCB. And it comes down at an angle there. And remember just to look for that fullness that this muscle group should have. And the deltoid is a pretty big muscle here. So that's your shoulder muscle, if you're wondering. It's going to be responsible for a lot of the movement of the arm. So something like that. Looking at the backside here, I can either alt to bring this in a little bit, probably a little bit of alt here, and then a little bit more sculpting here for fullness. And just take time observing that form. Now, to get it to have more of the squareness we're looking for, we can refer back to our 3D references that we worked from for our image plane. It has a pretty good pass on detailing here. So this is one of those things where you're not really going to see it till you see it. So let's go ahead and square up this top area here. And we can use this to kind of adjust the placement of our elements for the shoulder a little bit better. We want to have a clear silhouette. The head is still maintaining proportions, so we can see that a little bit better there. Unfortunately, we can't use the V trick here. I'm going to lower my subdivisions down to probably about 3. And I can use the BMV brush here, the move brush, to kind of move these in and just kind of start matching this shape a little bit better here. and you can get an idea for the placement there. Now, we can also check other things too, like the deltoid line. You know, do I have it placed correctly? And you'll see right now that is pretty close to the reference, I would say. But you can see what we're not quite getting is the squareness there of the deltoid, and that's something that I want to make sure I'm getting in there. So something like that. And this is going to be best expressed probably through the H polish brush. We could come in here with BHP. And at a lower subdivision, at level 5 is where I'm going to do this. I'm going to just kind of give a bit of an angle there to that front and then an angle to the top. So we get that flatness and squareness of the deltoid that we're looking for. And that's a bit aggressive there, but that's essentially what we're looking for in terms of that structure. So just be mindful it has that sort of squareness to it. And as a matter of fact, we can H polish across a lot of these surfaces here. And the cool thing is if we do it at a lower level, you'll see that when we go up, it actually keeps the striations in there. That's a little bit too square for me though. So I'm actually going to come down here a little bit lower to maybe 4, kind of nudge that in there a little bit more. And just work at a lower subdivision so we don't really lose our muscle striations. But we can also at the same time work the heads of the deltoid as sort of a group here to create this structure that we're seeing. And we can compare that again here to our reference. And H polish sometimes removes volume, so just be mindful of that. That's the top of the head. I might bring this down slightly here so it's more easy to follow. And then using the move brush here, again, I can bring out the volume of those shoulders, but now we have a nice looking angle. Now we can also check this to the backside a bit as well. Just kind of check our line work back here for the deltoid, and you'll see ours is kind of sinking at a lower angle than our reference, so we can move that into place to just kind of tidy that up. I think the front angle's okay, coming onto the arm. And we could also check the side angle here, which is something we didn't do any Écorché study of, and this could be very helpful. And once again, I'm using the head as my measurement anchor there because we haven't altered it, and it should be pretty close to our block and mesh, and that's an advantage to making our block and mesh close. And I'd say that's pretty close on that deltoid in terms of the shape there that we're getting. The only thing that's a little bit different is the read on the shading. And that could be due to lighting. And it could also be to just needing to come in here with the clay buildup again and kind of build on top. So let's go ahead and do that. Do a color pass real quick. I'll go to RGB and we'll make this one a yellow color to go in with our shoulder group. And I'll just kind of lightly come in here and do a pass to kind of even things out, add in the muscle striation detail again that we lost from some of the operations we did in terms of H polishing and moving, and just kind of giving this the fullness that it needs and deserves in relationship to the surrounding deltoid heads. And remember, we are going to do a skin pass on this later, where some of this detail gets smoothed out. So some of the areas like this crack here, I'm not going to worry about at this stage, but if you did want to, you could shift, smooth, BDS, and carve in a fresh one, which might not be a bad idea. The deltoid heads are pretty pronounced in the final form, so it's one of those things that we may end up wanting to do. But yeah, take some time here shaping this, getting it to look good, and checking it from every angle. Need a little bit more fullness there, and then I'll do the same thing here, BDS, to just kind of define this deltoid head more clearly. Coming down into here, and then clay buildup to nudge that together. All right, so that is going to give us our deltoids, pretty big form on the torso there, connecting into our shoulders. So let's save. So now let's move into our next muscle region, which is going to be the trapezius muscle. Now, the trapezius muscle has a lot going on in terms of the connection points. So let's take a look at this and kind of talk about what we're seeing here. The trapezius is going to radiate from the shoulder, attaching to different points along the spine. Just to remember what the trapezius muscle is, it's that one we started with. So I'm going to highlight it here in blue. And some of the key connection points that you're going to see is you're going to see this large tube structure kind of on the neck and running up. You're going to see this area that runs off of the shoulder blade, so coming down into here. And you're also going to see sort of this little pocket here that runs to this indented area. And then the 7th cervical vertebrae is going to be right around here, which is that bump on the back. It's a bony landmark. So a lot of stuff going on here in terms of what we're getting there. So let's go ahead and get in and start kind of bulking these and defining these a little bit better in terms of the muscle structure to emphasize the trapezius. I'm going to start with the clay buildup here. We're going to turn off our RGB for now and dive in and get started here to where this is going to go. So one of the things we don't have as clearly defined that I would like to get in here is kind of just the side view. When it comes to the trapezius side view, it's going to be coming down from sort of the back of the head here. And it's going to come down onto the scapula. So this is going to be kind of the area we're looking at for that huge trapezius muscle. Lots of form here coming down into the front. And it's going to connect along that ridge of the scapula, if you recall. So we're going to want to get that in there. From here, we can start our clay buildup, and we can actually start by defining sort of the shoulder mass here that rolls around this. And this should be kind of coming from the front here, this definition we made, and having a nice volume to it. So the belly should kind of be near the midsection of this. It doesn't concave in, it poofs out. So that's what I'm looking for here, is kind of getting that belly and then working it up and back into here. And this is going to be the section that's kind of running along the scapula. And it does have a bit of a volume to it. This is then going to run into the side of the neck here. And it doesn't really get lost all that much. I feel like the neck here is not that well defined, and we'll kind of get to that as we go. This is one of those challenging muscles because it kind of sits in two places at once. Also feel like we may need to come back and define this better so that we're not losing the neck entirely. This feels a bit aggressive, but we'll get to that as we go. And yeah, so this is going to kind of come down from here, follow along those shoulder blades, and then it kind of continues to wrap around the shoulder blades here as it tucks down into the torso. So you can see how it has sort of this radiating pattern along this area where that shoulder blade is going to sit underneath it. So that's what I'm trying to capture here with this volume. And then as we get down into here, these striations kind of just dive towards the middle and create this line ridge along the spine. And remember, there's that deep muscle underneath there that's kind of helping define that. And you'll notice I haven't done much work in the center area. This is going to be where the 7th cervical vertebrae is kind of located in this midsection here. And you can actually feel that in the back of your neck. It's going to be kind of up towards the top. It's going to be around here, I believe, where we're going to see that 7th cervical vertebrae. And then as far as the rest of these goes, we can just kind of continue to have these dive into the spine and then give them volume emerging out from this area, like so, to give this the form we're looking for this muscle. And you can just see this muscle is massive here. Very large muscle. But basically what we should see is mostly round forms kind of around these key structures. 7th cervical vertebrae I kind of made a little bit too big there. And then it's going to kind of roll down into these areas. Now we can spend a little bit of time on the front here. There's sort of an interesting setup here where this muscle kind of wraps down and around like so a little bit, kind of creating a concavity here over another muscle group, which we'll get into later when we get into the neck muscles. I'm not going to worry about it for now. This is an area we will revisit, but we'll just kind of get a base shape in there for the moment. Now, I'm going to compare this to my 3D images before I really get adjusting this, because this is a pretty big form. So let's go ahead and compare this. I'll do a quick comparison to the front, and I want to get sort of a full body here just so I can compare the volume. That's going to be the main thing I want to compare to. And just get a nice volume going to it so that way I don't have a muscle that's too large, because I feel like right now the shape's kind of getting too large. So just match that up to the best I can based on the head placement. And you'll see how wide out I have that coming. I'm just going to come in with my move brush, BMV, and move that in to be less aggressive. I can then turn to the back view and just check to make sure all the lines and stuff are looking good. And I'd say that's a pretty good one in terms of placement there. And then from the side view, you can see there is a bit of a side volume to it. We can just make sure that we're not going too much in any direction there. And the side view is a little bit smaller there. Actually, looks like I have more of a fullness to it potentially than I do in the side view there. So that's going to be kind of a hard one to match, and I'm actually not 100% sure which is more accurate. So I'm going to check some other references real quick here. I'd say that's good enough. This might actually be a little bit more accurate than the 3D reference that we have, which is interesting. Okay, so something like that, but we could take a moment here to just shape this just like we've done previously. So I might come in here with something like BHP, H polish brush, and just take a moment here to get these angles looking a little bit nicer coming out of here. So that way we're getting a better sense of connection. But actually, I don't think we need to do that on this one. I think it kind of does just come over and overlap that. So the last thing I'll do is just switch my RGB to on with my clay buildup. And just do a very light pass here, just kind of coloring this in. So I'll go ahead and make this green. And just kind of add in a little bit more volume that we may have lost from the movement here. And just kind of continue the muscle striation. So this is going to be the trapezius muscle here that we're trying to get in here. And if you want to, you could just turn off the Z-add to just color. That might be a good idea here if you don't want to mess up your form, if you got it looking all pretty and stuff. But I feel like mine could benefit from a little bit more volume. And then if you've messed up any of your other colorations, you can hit C. You could turn off Z-add, and you could just come back in here and color this. C lets you sample the existing color. So just C, you can sample that existing color. C, sample the existing C. And you can easily come in here and access that. And sometimes it doesn't want to paint everything. That's okay. This isn't a paint job. This is just a quick reference for you guys to look at while I'm working. Okay, so that is going to be the trapezius in there. So let's go ahead and save our progress on that. And we can work into the next muscle group. The next muscle group is going to be the latissimus dorsi. The latissimus dorsi is this very large muscle on the back here. And it's going to come down the side. So we can isolate this potentially, or we could just remove the arms using Control-Shift and then Alt. And I kind of prefer to do this when possible to keep as much of the arm in there as possible. You'll see I did get an accidental point there. I'm just going to Control-Shift and undo and just try and be as close to that as I can because I do want to make sure we have as much of the armpit as we can get. But the latissimus dorsi from the side is going to kind of come down like so. And generally I like to start from the armpit from this. This is where it originates from, essentially, and it radiates out from here. So in terms of the muscle striations, they're going to kind of follow this pattern here, going down the back. So it's nice to have. So let's go ahead and start by defining that with the BDS, dam standard. So I'm just going to get BDS for dam standard here. And we're just going to carve along here the area the latissimus dorsi is going to go back into here. We can switch to our clay buildup, BCB. and we can start to build this up. So I'm going to turn off RGB. I'm just going to build up without color because it's easier for me to see. And we're going to follow the muscle striations out like so. That's going to be the directionality they're going to go. And these are basically just going to roll into this back area here. Now, there are some subforms in this that we can take some time trying to capture that roll around some of the structures. I'm going to start by just getting my radiation here correct in terms of how this muscle's rolling. And then we can talk about these different structures. There's a lot here already, but some of the structures that we tend to see on the latissimus dorsi, because it's a very thin muscle, is a continuation of the shoulder blade down here. There's a bit of a ledge that you tend to see. Then those muscle groups that kind of run under here, if we take a look at the external oblique, there tends to be a bit of a curve into the external oblique. And then those deep muscles of the spine tend to have a bit of a curve. So what we can do at this point is switch to a lower subdivision level. I'm going to go down to maybe 4 here, go to BDS for dam standard, and we could carve in an area here to kind of represent the scapula, carve in an area here to kind of go down to the external oblique, and just kind of get these rolling hills on here. Now, this is kind of hard to capture, so if you don't feel comfortable doing what I'm doing here, feel free to just kind of leave it at what we just had. But you can see how we get these separations. From here, I can use the H polish to kind of just make these look a little bit more natural. And this is a relatively subtle transition between these. It's not super blatant like what I have currently. So using the H polish here, I can kind of ripple these, I guess you could say, a little bit easier. And what I'm doing here is just kind of toning back the form, but maintaining the structure that we had. And then we're just going to put the striations on top of these, essentially, to give us what we're looking for. And I don't believe this is one of those things well defined in our 3D reference. It might be in there a little bit, but it's one of those things you can kind of see and sometimes notice, especially on like extreme bodybuilders. That can be nice to have. So let's go ahead and bring this back up to around 6, see what that's looking like. And we're sort of getting there. We can now use the clay buildup here to kind of tie these in together. And this is where I might use something like Alt to just kind of remove some volume here so that we get sort of that defined ridge of the scapula a little bit better. And then just kind of Alt down into here so we get that next muscle group and then down into here for that next one. And just take some time kind of bulking these together as well so that these lines are really subtle that we just put in here. And also try and maintain the radiation that we're getting out of here. So those ones, you know, try to work them in if you want, but they're not so important as just knowing where this muscle is located. And I'm just going to use Alt here to remove some of the volume down here and actually fill this in a little bit better. I feel like the ram brush kind of did us dirty there. Let me use the dam standard here a little bit, and I'll use H polish, BHP to just kind of push this out and away a little bit better so it's a softer transition into here rather than this sort of deep dive. And it should have a curvature to it because remember those muscles, those deep muscles kind of run along here. So you're going to be running into that area. All right, and let's get the muscles here to look like they're running into this area better. And then same here. So one of the other areas I like to give a little bit of attention to on this backside here is the relationship this has to these shoulders and to the arms. So the latissimus dorsi is actually going to tuck underneath the armpit a bit. So we can use the dam standard here to kind of separate these areas better. and kind of define that armpit. I'm going to use shift here to smooth that, because you can see we're getting some weirdness there. And then if I control click the body here, we should be able to isolate it and just kind of emphasize where that's coming from better. But along here, there's sort of a lip on the latissimus dorsi to where the shoulder sits into. So you want to make sure that this has a bit of volume to it underneath here. Kind of running along this area. So that way it kind of has a catch there. And like I mentioned, it kind of follows around the scapula there. So something like that is going to give us an okay read on that. Now, like I mentioned, we can compare this to our 3D view, but I feel like our 3D view has a simplified version of this. It doesn't have the rippling effect that I mentioned. We can still kind of check it for relationship to everything else, since this is a fairly accurate rendition here. And you'll see some of the side volumes not quite there yet that we're seeing, but that's okay. I'd say that matches fairly well. And then when we get to the backside here, you'll see that this one is not nearly as pokey outy. And that is something that we're going to probably want to work into here, is make sure that this doesn't have quite as much volume. One thing I'm noticing is it tucks a lot more on our reference, which is good to know. So let me hide my arms so I don't mess them up on accident. So Control-Shift-Alt. And then just coming into here, I'm at a lower subdivision, or bound subdivision 3. I'm just going to push that in a bit more so we get more of that outer angle. And that should be okay. I did have some faces hidden there, so let me just make sure that's not causing an issue. All right, that should be good. And then at this lower level here, maybe around 4, that might have enough definition. I'm going to switch back to the H polish here. And I'm just going to try and flatten this a little bit more into the shoulder and into the scapula, and just kind of finding that shape that I want to capture there. And I'm doing this at a low level so that it doesn't really mess with everything, but it helps them meld together and mesh together, because I feel like I made that lip a little bit too strong. And hopefully you can see the end result there looking kind of nice. Okay, so that is going to be the last major muscle on the back here. Let's go ahead and give it some coloration just so we can see this. I'll make it sort of a reddish purple, so that way we have a good read on it. And once again, we can come in with the clay buildup, BCB, and kind of just do a finishing pass on muscle striations. And just remember, the striations originate here from the armpit. So this is going to be the area where these are coming out of, radiating into the body along here in a radial fashion, and then tucking towards the trapezius muscle for the most part, but kind of maintaining their radial angle here, which I'm doing a poor job of capturing this time around. So let me correct that. Usually with radial things, what I like to do is kind of do a outer inner last type thing, where I do the 2 outer angles, the inner angles, and then just kind of target towards them. The muscle striations don't matter too much. They give a nice visual, and it is good to understand the direction they go in, because they kind of indicate the direction of movement. So when it comes to studying motion and studying animation, it kind of gives us a subconscious idea of where these things go. This kind of tucks into this, but we can give it a little bit better volume here now that we have that relationship, and just kind of work this area again. I tend not to like to work this in color when I'm doing this on my own, because I feel like I get a better read of the muscle structure and direction without color. That's why I'm doing the initial block in without color. But yeah, it's to help you guys with the visual. So I'm going to come in here with the dam standard and just nudge this down a little here, because it's getting too bulky. And sometimes you get these areas that are just hard to work. There we go. Masterpiece. I'll just H polish in here. Maybe even hit this with the smooth, and then just kind of get a better sense of the buildup going there. Okay, so I'm going to switch my color here. I'm going to turn off Z-add and just kind of give us a better idea of how this looks here. And BCD really quick, just to kind of bring back the striations here since I kind of lost them since I overlapped them. And there we go. All right. So that is going to give us our study of the back muscles. Let's save. And just take a moment here to review the individual muscles we've created. The trapezius is this large one here. Then we have the deltoid, which is our shoulder. The latissimus dorsi. A new feature that we haven't talked about, which is the triangular indentation or depression. And we're going to have a few of those on the body. Then in terms of the individual shoulder muscles, we have the infraspinatus. We have the teres minor. And the teres major underneath that. We're going to continue working these forms as we add anatomical features to the body. So as we add relating features, we're probably going to come back and revisit some of these, but we're going to approach this section by section, starting with the back of the torso. We'll go ahead and finish up the torso next, but that is going to be where we begin. All right. So as a challenge, what I want you to do is I want you to get to this point with your study. I want you to go through the back muscles, get in the group of the shoulder, get in the deltoid, the trapezius, and the latissimus dorsi, and try and capture those forms as closely as possible. Use anatomy reference, any that you have. You can use the reference supplied in this course. The 3D reference is a good one to go to, or if you have access to the Écorché drawings, I highly encourage you to use those as a point of reference to help you visualize this. Okay, so go ahead and give that a shot, and then we'll continue with our study next.